A village in Greece, 1700s. Sunset. A funeral procession carries a body through narrow streets toward the cemetery. The deceased, a man with red hair, is being prepared for burial. But the family is nervous, terrified even, not because they're grieving, because they're afraid of what might happen after burial. According to local belief, this red-haired man is at high risk of becoming a Vrykolakas, an undead creature that rises from the grave to feed on the living. His pale skin, his sensitivity to sunlight, his unusual hair color, all signs that he might transform after death. The family takes precautions. They place a wax cross in his mouth. They position his body carefully. They say the proper prayers, anything to prevent him from returning. Because in Greek folklore, and across much of Europe, redheads were believed to become vampires after death. This is the story of how red hair became associated with the undead, why pale skin and unusual features sparked supernatural fears, and how a genetic rarity turned into a death sentence for thousands. The rarity that sparked fear, genetics, and superstition. Let's start with biology. Red hair is caused by a mutation in the MC1R gene on chromosome 16. It's recessive. Both parents must carry the gene for a child to have red hair. The result? Red hair is the rarest natural hair color in the world. Only 1 to 2% of the global population has it. In ancient and medieval times, that percentage was even lower outside specific regions like Scotland and Ireland. In places like Greece, where most people had olive skin and dark hair, red hair was shocking, unusual, different, and in human history, different often equals dangerous. Red-haired people also typically have pale skin, freckles, and light-colored eyes. The same MC1R mutation that produces red hair also reduces melanin production, making them more susceptible to sunburn and skin damage from UV exposure. In Mediterranean climates, hot, sunny, bright, redheads would burn easily. They'd avoid midday sun. They'd look perpetually pale compared to their olive-skinned neighbors. From a modern scientific perspective, this makes perfect sense. But to people in medieval Greece who'd never heard of genetics or melanin, it looked suspicious. Why don't they tan like everyone else? Why do they burn in sunlight? Why are they so pale? The answer to superstitious minds was obvious. They're not fully human. They're something else. The Vrykolakas, Greece's vampire, medieval folklore, not ancient. Here's where we need to clarify something important. The belief that redheads become vampires isn't from ancient Greece. It's from medieval and post-Byzantine Greek folklore, specifically related to the Vrykolakas. The word Vrykolakas is derived from the Bulgarian word Varkolak, which originally meant werewolf. The term entered Greek folklore around the 1600s, or perhaps slightly before, borrowed from neighboring Slavic countries where vampire legends were widespread. The Vrykolakas is Greece's version of the vampire, though it's different from modern vampire mythology. The Vrykolakas doesn't just drink blood. It eats flesh, particularly livers. It causes disease and epidemics. It knocks on doors at night, calling out names. If you answer on the first knock, you'll die within days and become a Vrykolakas yourself. This is why, even today, some Greek villages have a superstition. Never answer the door on the first knock. Always wait for the second. The Greeks traditionally believed that a person could become a Vrykolakas after death due to several causes: living a sacrilegious life, being excommunicated from the church, burial in unconsecrated ground, or eating meat from a sheep wounded by a wolf or werewolf. But there was another risk factor: having red hair and light eyes. Those with red hair and light eyes were often suspected of being vampires, as they resembled Slavic peoples, whose folklore was full of such figures. People with red hair and gray eyes were thought to be vampires according to accounts near the region of modern Serbia. The connection wasn't random. Red hair was more common in Slavic and Northern European populations. To Greeks, red hair marked you as foreign, possibly Slavic, possibly from regions where vampire folklore originated. And that made you suspect. Why, pale skin sealed the connection. The link between redheads and vampires wasn't just about hair color. It was about the entire package: red hair, pale skin, sensitivity to sunlight. Modern vampire mythology, pale avoiding sunlight, nocturnal, comes from much later sources. But the association between pale skin and the undead goes back centuries. Legend states that the body of the Vrykolakas, although dead, does not decay, but becomes quite stocky and takes on a healthy, ruddy complexion due to its diet of flesh and blood. This is quite different from modern descriptions of vampires as pale and sickly in appearance. But here's the paradox. While the Vrykolakas itself was described as having a ruddy complexion after feeding, the people suspected of becoming Vrykolakas, the redheads, were pale before death. The logic went like this: redheads avoid sunlight because they burn easily. Vampires avoid sunlight because it destroys them. Therefore, redheads must be predisposed to vampirism. It's completely irrational, but superstition rarely follows logic. And when someone is different, when they look different, act different, live different, superstition fills the gaps. The European persecution, medieval to early modern. The belief that redheads were dangerous wasn't limited to Greece. Across Europe, red hair became associated with evil, witchcraft, and the supernatural. In medieval Christian Europe, red hair was often associated with witches and witchcraft. During the Spanish Inquisition and the witch trials of the 15th, the 17th centuries, red hair was sometimes considered evidence of witchcraft. In 15th century Germany, red-haired people were considered witches, and an estimated 45,000 people were tortured and killed during witch hunts, many of them women, many with red hair. The association came partly from religious art. In many medieval paintings, Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Jesus, was depicted with red hair. So was Mary Magdalene in some traditions. The message was clear: red hair equals betrayal, sin, moral corruption. There's even a legend that claims Judas was the first vampire, spreading the curse through his bloodline. Red hair became the mark of that cursed lineage. Ancient Egyptians were thought to have sacrificed red-haired men by burning them and scattering their ashes at the grave of Osiris, the king of the dead. Whether this actually happened or is itself a legend is debated by historians, but the story persists. The Romans bought red-haired slaves, often from Thrace, a region known for red-haired people, at higher prices, believing them to be signs of good luck. At the same time, Romans feared Thracians for their combative nature and red hair. Red hair was simultaneously desirable and terrifying, exotic and evil, lucky and cursed. Across Europe, redheads faced suspicion, persecution, and violence. And in Greece, that suspicion manifested as vampire fears. The burning of bodies, prevention practices. If you were suspected of being likely to become a Vrykolakas, especially if you had red hair, your family took precautions. Ancient Greeks believed that redheads turned into vampires after they died. They burned their bodies to stop them from rising from the grave. Not always, not everywhere, but in some communities the fear was strong enough that red-haired corpses were cremated instead of buried, ensuring they couldn't rise as Vrykolakas. Other prevention methods included burying the corpse face down, placing a wax cross and pottery inscribed with "Jesus Christ conquers" in the mouth, positioning scythes or sickles near the grave to ward off demons, exhuming bodies after 3 years to check for decay. If the body hadn't decayed sufficiently, it was labeled a Vrykolakas and destroyed. During World War II, when the Great Famine of 1941–42 killed about 300,000 Greeks, graveyards overflowed. Families were forced to bury loved ones outside cemeteries in unconsecrated ground. This caused enormous distress. Belief in the Vrykolakas was still common in Greece, especially in rural areas. Some families feared their relatives would become vampires because they weren't buried properly. Tragically, some families were so scared that they beheaded the corpses of their loved ones before burial to prevent vampire transformation. Even in the 20th century, vampire beliefs shaped behavior, and redheads remained suspect. The slow decline of superstition. When did these beliefs end? Gradually, very gradually. By the mid-20th century, vampire beliefs had declined in urban Greece, but persisted in rural areas. Even today, some Greek villages maintain the tradition of not answering the door on the first knock, a remnant of Vrykolakas folklore. The connection between red hair and vampirism faded as education spread, as genetics became understood, as superstition gave way to science. But the cultural memory remains. Ask Greeks about red hair and Vrykolakas, and many will know the connection, even if they don't believe it. Red hair went from cursed to exotic to fashionable. What was once evidence of supernatural evil is now considered striking, beautiful, rare in a positive sense. The same genetic mutation that once got people burned or beheaded is now celebrated, admired, sought after through hair dye. But for centuries, being a redhead in Greece or much of Europe meant living under suspicion, meant taking extra care with burial preparations, meant knowing that after death, your body might be mutilated to prevent you from rising. What it reveals about fear. The vampire redhead connection reveals something fundamental about human psychology. We fear what's different. Red hair is a visible, undeniable difference. You can't hide it, can't change it, historically, can't make it go away. And when something is different and we don't understand why, we create stories, explanations, myths that make the unfamiliar make sense within our world view. Redheads burn in sunlight. They must be cursed. They're pale. They must be undead. They're rare. They must be supernatural. The logic is backwards, starting with the conclusion redheads are dangerous, and working backwards to find evidence. But that's how superstition works. And once a belief takes hold, it spreads, reinforces itself, becomes common knowledge. For 1,000 years, Europeans knew that redheads were dangerous. Witches, vampires, cursed bloodlines. The evidence was right there. Pale skin, unusual features, burning in sunlight. It took science to disprove what superstition had established. And even then, beliefs persisted. Today, we mock these superstitions. How could anyone believe red hair meant vampirism? But we create our own superstitions about difference. We just call them by other names. The final stake. So here's what happened. Red hair is a rare genetic mutation. In places where it was uncommon, it sparked fear and superstition. In medieval Greece and across Europe, that fear manifested as vampire beliefs. Redheads, with their pale skin and sensitivity to sunlight, were thought to become undead after death. The belief persisted for centuries. Bodies were burned, precautions were taken, families lived in fear that their red-haired relatives would return from the grave. Gradually, as science advanced and education spread, the beliefs faded, but cultural memory remains. Next time you see someone with red hair, remember, for most of human history, that person would have been feared, suspected of witchcraft or vampirism, subject to persecution and violence. The same trait now considered striking and beautiful was once considered proof of supernatural evil. We've come a long way, but the story reminds us, difference has always provoked fear, and fear, left unchecked, creates monsters. Even when those monsters are just people with unusual hair,